I've always believed that some bonds are written in the stars, carved into your very DNA before you even take your first breath. Growing up in Honolulu, with the Pacific Ocean as our backyard and the warm Hawaiian sun painting our childhood golden, Kevin and I were living proof of that belief. We weren't just siblings. We were two halves of the same soul, born minutes apart, sharing everything from our first words to our deepest secrets. At least, that's what I thought for 25 years of my life. The morning that would change everything started like any other Tuesday in paradise. I was sitting on our lanai, sipping my usual macadamia nut coffee and watching the waves crash against the shore below our family home in Diamond Head. Kevin was already up, probably out for his morning surf, a ritual he'd maintained since we were teenagers. Mom was bustling around the kitchen, humming that old Hawaiian song she always sang when she was content. Dad had already left for his construction job, his truck rumbling down the driveway before dawn like it had every day for the past 2 decades. The package arrived with the mail, innocuous and small, bearing the logo of GeneTech Labs. My heart fluttered with excitement as I tore open the envelope, remembering how Kevin and I had decided to do these DNA tests on a whim last month. "It'll be fun," he had said, his green eyes sparkling with mischief. "Maybe we'll find out we're descended from Hawaiian royalty, or something crazy like that." We'd swabbed our cheeks, sealed the tubes, and sent them off, expecting nothing more than confirmation of what we already knew, that we were twins, bound by blood and an unbreakable connection. But as my eyes scanned the results, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The numbers and percentages swam before me, but one thing was crystal clear. Kevin and I shared 0 DNA. Not the 50% you'd expect from twins, not even the 25% of cousins. Absolutely nothing. My hands began to shake as I read the report again, then a third time, hoping I was misunderstanding something. The coffee mug slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering against the concrete floor of the lanai, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the peaceful morning air. "Melissa, what's wrong, honey?" Mom's voice drifted from the kitchen, tinged with concern. I couldn't answer. How do you tell your mother that everything you've believed about your family, about your very identity, might be a lie? The report felt heavy in my hands, like it contained the weight of 25 years of shared memories, inside jokes, and the kind of twin telepathy that had made us local legends. We'd finish each other's sentences, feel each other's pain, know when the other was in trouble, even from miles away. I stumbled back into the house, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. Mom looked up from where she was arranging plumeria flowers in a vase, her dark hair catching the morning light streaming through the windows. She'd always been beautiful, our mom, with her warm brown eyes and the kind of smile that could make you forget your troubles. But now, looking at her, I felt like I was seeing a stranger. "Mom," I managed to whisper, my voice cracking like I was 13 again, "we need to talk." The concern in her eyes deepened as she took in my pale face and shaking hands. "Melissa, you're scaring me. What's going on?" She moved toward me, her maternal instincts kicking in, but I stepped back, holding up the DNA report like a shield between us. The paper rustled in my trembling grip, and I watched as her eyes focused on the GeneTech logo. For just a moment, so brief I almost missed it, something flickered across her face. Fear? Guilt? Recognition? But then it was gone, replaced by confusion that looked almost too perfect, too practiced. "These DNA results," I said, my voice gaining strength even as my world crumbled around me. "They say Kevin and I aren't related. Not at all." "How is that possible, Mom? How can twins share no DNA?" The question hung in the air between us like a storm cloud, heavy with implications I wasn't ready to face. But I had to know the truth, even if it destroyed everything I thought I knew about my family, about myself, about the boy I'd called my twin brother for 25 years. The silence that followed my question stretched between us like a chasm, filled only by the distant sound of waves and the gentle rustle of palm trees outside. Mom's face had gone pale, and I watched as she slowly set down the plumeria flowers, her movements careful and deliberate like she was buying time to think. "That's impossible," she finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Those tests aren't always accurate, honey. You know how these online companies are. They're just trying to make money off people's curiosity." But I knew my mother well enough to recognize when she was deflecting. The way she wouldn't meet my eyes, the slight tremor in her hands as she reached for her coffee cup. These were tells I'd learned to read over 25 years of being her daughter. Mom, this isn't some cheap online test. This is Gene Tech Labs. They do forensic work for the police. Their accuracy rate is over 99%. I moved closer. The DNA report still clutched in my hand, like evidence in a trial I never wanted to be part of. Well, maybe there was a mix-up at the lab, she insisted, finally looking at me with those warm brown eyes that had comforted me through scraped knees and broken hearts. But now, instead of comfort, I saw something else lurking in their depths, a desperation that made my stomach clench with dread. You and Kevin have always been so close, so connected. You're twins, Melissa. I was there when you were born. I should know. Her laugh sounded forced, brittle, like glass about to shatter. The front door slammed, and Kevin's voice echoed through the house. Mel, you won't believe the waves this morning. They were absolutely perfect. His footsteps bounded up the stairs, and I could hear him humming, probably still high from his surf session. In a few seconds, he'd walk into this kitchen, his sandy hair still damp with salt water, his face glowing with that post-surf euphoria that had been part of our morning routine for years. How was I supposed to look at him now, knowing what I knew? Don't say anything to Kevin, Mom whispered urgently, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. Not until we figure this out. Please, Melissa. You'll just upset him for nothing. The desperation in her voice was unmistakable now, and it sent ice through my veins. If this was really just a lab error, why was she so panicked? Why did she look like someone who'd been caught in a lie that had been festering for decades? Kevin appeared in the doorway, his wetsuit peeled down to his waist, his green eyes bright with joy. For a moment, I just stared at him, this person I'd shared everything with, looking for some sign that we weren't connected by blood. But he looked the same as always, tall and lean from years of surfing, with that easy smile that had charmed half the girls in our high school. What's with the serious faces? He asked, his grin faltering as he took in the tension crackling between Mom and me. Nothing, I heard myself say, even as every fiber of my being screamed that this was anything but nothing, just family stuff. I folded the DNA report and shoved it into my pocket, feeling like I was hiding a bomb that could explode at any moment. Kevin's eyes narrowed slightly. He'd always been able to read me as easily as I could read him. Twin telepathy, we'd always called it. But if we weren't twins, if we weren't even related, what did that make all those moments of perfect understanding? Okay, Kevin said slowly, but I could see the questions forming in his eyes. He knew something was wrong, just like he'd always known when I was upset or scared or angry. That connection we'd shared since childhood was still there, humming between us like an invisible wire. Well, I'm going to grab a shower, but later, we're talking. You look like you've seen a ghost, Mel. He kissed the top of my head as he passed, a gesture so familiar and brotherly that it made my heart ache with confusion and loss. The rest of that day passed in a haze of forced normalcy that felt like the worst kind of performance. I went through the motions, made lunch, answered Kevin's texts about weekend plans, even managed to laugh at Dad's terrible jokes when he came home from work. But underneath it all, the DNA report burned in my pocket like a secret that was eating me alive from the inside out. Every time Kevin smiled at me, every time he called me sis or referenced some shared memory, I felt like I was living a lie. That evening, I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, studying my reflection with new eyes. I'd always taken pride in the features Kevin and I shared, the same olive skin that tanned beautifully in the Hawaiian sun, the same dark hair with natural highlights, the same stubborn chin that Dad always said we'd inherited from Mom's side. But now I was looking for differences, cataloging every detail that might prove we weren't related. Kevin's eyes were green, while mine were brown. His hair had a slight wave, while mine was straight. Were these the clues I'd been blind to my entire life? Sleep was impossible that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun lazy circles above me, listening to the familiar sounds of our house settling around me. Down the hall, I could hear Kevin's soft snoring, a sound that had comforted me through countless childhood storms and teenage anxieties. We'd shared so many midnight conversations, whispered secrets in the dark, planned our futures together. He was going to be the best man at my wedding someday, and I was going to be the godmother to his children. How do you rebuild a relationship when the very foundation of it might be built on a lie? The next morning, I cornered Mom in the garden where she was tending to her orchids. It was her sanctuary, this little corner of paradise she'd created behind our house, filled with exotic flowers and the sound of wind chimes. She looked up as I approached, and I saw her shoulders tense, like she'd been expecting this confrontation. "We need to finish our conversation from yesterday," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "And this time, I want the truth." "Melissa, honey, I've told you the truth," she said, but she wouldn't look at me directly. Instead, she focused on deadheading a particularly vibrant purple orchid, her movements sharp and agitated. "Those test results are wrong. You and Kevin are twins. You were born 3 minutes apart at Queen's Medical Center on March 15th, 1998. I have the birth certificates to prove it." But even as she spoke, I noticed how she avoided mentioning the hospital details, how her voice caught slightly on certain words. "Then let's get retested," I said, pulling out my phone. "I'll call GeneTech right now and order new kits. If you're so sure they made a mistake, you won't mind us proving it, right?" I watched her face carefully, looking for any sign of the mother I thought I knew. But the woman standing before me seemed like a stranger, her eyes darting around the garden like she was looking for an escape route. That's not necessary," she stammered, finally setting down her gardening shears with shaking hands. "Why would you want to waste money on more tests? You're just going to upset Kevin with all this nonsense." The way she said his name, with a protective fierceness that seemed almost desperate, made something click in my mind. She wasn't just trying to protect me from the truth. She was trying to protect Kevin. But from what? "Mom," I said softly, stepping closer to her among the orchids that suddenly seemed too bright, too perfect for the darkness of this conversation. "What aren't you telling me? What happened when we were born?" For a moment, I saw her mask slip completely. The fear in her eyes was raw and real, the kind of terror that comes from keeping a secret so big it could destroy everything you've built your life around. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that my DNA results weren't wrong. The question wasn't whether Kevin and I were related. It was how long my mother had known we weren't, and why she'd chosen to lie about it for 25 years. The breaking point came 3 days later, after 3 days of Mom's increasingly desperate denials and Kevin's growing suspicion that something was seriously wrong. I'd been carrying the weight of this secret like a stone in my chest, and it was crushing me. Every family dinner felt like a charade, every laugh felt forced, every moment of normalcy felt like a betrayal of the truth that was clawing its way to the surface. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't look at my family without feeling like I was drowning in lies. I finally cracked when Kevin cornered me on the beach behind our house, the same stretch of sand where we'd built countless sandcastles as children and shared our deepest fears as teenagers. "Mel, what the hell is going on?" he demanded, his green eyes blazing with frustration and concern. "You've been acting like a zombie for days. Mom's been jumpy as a cat, and Dad keeps looking at both of you like he's waiting for a bomb to go off. Did someone die? Are you sick? Because this silent treatment is killing me." The words tumbled out of me like a dam bursting. I told him about the DNA test, about the results that showed we shared no genetic material, about Mom's frantic denials and desperate attempts to convince me the lab had made a mistake. I watched his face change as I spoke, saw the confusion give way to disbelief, then to a kind of hollow shock that mirrored my own. When I finished, we sat in silence on the sand, watching the waves roll in and out, both of us trying to process what this meant for everything we'd believed about ourselves. "So we're not twins," Kevin said finally, his voice flat and emotionless. "We're not even related." He picked up a handful of sand and let it slip through his fingers, watching it scatter in the wind. 25 years, Mel. 25 years of thinking we shared something special, something that made us different from other siblings. And it was all, what? A lie? A mistake? The pain in his voice was like a knife to my heart because I could hear my own anguish reflected in his words. That evening, we confronted our parents together. Dad was in his usual spot on the couch, watching the evening news, while Mom was in the kitchen preparing dinner. The normalcy of the scene felt surreal, given what we were about to unleash. "We need to talk," I announced, my voice cutting through the domestic tranquility like a blade. "All of us. Now." Dad looked up from the TV, his weathered face creasing with concern, while Mom appeared in the doorway, her face already pale with dread. "It's about the DNA test," Kevin said, his voice steady but cold. "And before you start with the lab error story again, Mom, we want the truth, the real truth, because Mel and I have been thinking, and there are too many things that don't add up. Like how you always got weird when people said we didn't look exactly alike, or how you never wanted us to do those family tree projects in school, or how you and Dad always changed the subject when we asked about our birth." I watched Dad's face as Kevin spoke, saw the color drain from his cheeks and the way his hands gripped the arms of his chair. He knew. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Dad had known all along. This wasn't just Mom's secret. It was a family conspiracy that had been maintained for a quarter of a century. "Brian," Mom whispered, her voice breaking, "we have to tell them." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad slowly reached for the remote and turned off the TV, the sudden quiet making every breath, every heartbeat seem amplified. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of years of hidden truth. "Your mother's right," he said, not looking at either of us. "You deserve to know, but you have to understand. We did what we thought was best. We were trying to protect you both." And with those words, I knew our family as we'd known it was about to shatter into a million pieces, never to be whole again. The truth, when it finally came, was more devastating and beautiful than anything I could have imagined. Mom collapsed into Dad's chair, her face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking with 25 years of suppressed guilt and fear. Dad moved to stand behind her, his weathered hands resting protectively on her shoulders, and I could see the weight of their shared secret in every line of his face. "There was a mix-up at the hospital," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not with the lab results, Melissa. With the babies. With you and Kevin." Kevin's sharp intake of breath beside me was the only sound in the room as the magnitude of what Dad was saying began to sink in. The waves outside seemed to have gone silent, as if the entire world was holding its breath for this moment of truth. I felt like I was floating outside my own body, watching this scene unfold from somewhere far away, because surely this couldn't be happening to my family, to my life. "I gave birth to twins," Mom said, her voice muffled by her hands but gaining strength as she continued. "Two beautiful, perfect babies. But there were complications. I was bleeding, and they had to rush me into emergency surgery. The babies were taken to the nursery, and when I woke up hours later, they brought me 2 infants and told me they were mine." She finally looked up, her eyes red and swollen with tears that had been waiting decades to fall. "One was definitely mine. I knew it the moment I saw her. That was you, Melissa. You had my eyes, my nose, the same little birthmark on your shoulder that I have. But the other baby..." Her voice broke completely, and Dad squeezed her shoulders, silently encouraging her to continue. "The other baby was Kevin, and even though something felt different, even though he didn't look quite like what I'd expected, the nurses were so sure, and I was so exhausted and overwhelmed." Kevin's voice was hollow when he finally spoke. "So I'm not your biological son." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact that hung in the air like a death sentence. "Whose son am I? Where are my real parents?" The pain in his voice was so raw, so immediate, that I instinctively reached for his hand, the same way I'd done countless times throughout our childhood when he was hurt or scared. But now I wondered if I had the right to comfort him, if our connection meant anything when it wasn't built on shared blood. His fingers intertwined with mine anyway, holding on like I was his anchor in a storm that was threatening to wash away everything he'd ever known about himself. And why didn't anyone ever try to fix it? Why didn't you give me back to my real family? The accusation in his words was like a slap, and I saw Mom flinch as if he'd physically struck her, because by the time we realized what had happened, it was too late, Dad said, his voice thick with emotion. It was 3 days later when a nurse mentioned that there had been some confusion in the nursery that night. Apparently, another family had been asking questions about their baby, saying he didn't look right. But when we tried to investigate, when we asked to speak to this other family, we were told they had already left the hospital. They had taken their baby and disappeared. He paused, running a hand through his graying hair, and I could see the exhaustion of carrying this secret for so long, etched in every line of his face. "We tried to find them, Kevin. We hired a private investigator. We contacted social services. We did everything we could think of, but it was like they had vanished into thin air. And meanwhile, you were here with us, and we were falling in love with you more every day." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Mom's quiet sobbing and the distant crash of waves against the shore. I tried to process what I was hearing, tried to understand how my parents could have kept such a monumental secret for 25 years. "So you just decided to keep him?" I asked, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "You decided to raise someone else's child and never tell anyone the truth?" Part of me was horrified by their deception, but another part, the part that had watched Kevin grow up, had seen how much my parents loved him, understood the impossible choice they had faced. How do you give up a child you've already started to love? How do you tear apart a family that's already begun to form? "It wasn't that simple," Mom said, finally lifting her head to look at us both. "We were going to tell the authorities. We were going to do the right thing. But then days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, and Kevin was thriving with us. He was happy, he was healthy, he was ours in every way that mattered except biology." She reached out toward Kevin, but he pulled back, his face a mask of hurt and confusion that broke my heart. "And his biological parents, we never found any trace of them. It was like they didn't want to be found. So we made a choice, maybe not the right choice, but the only choice we could live with. We chose to love you both and raise you as twins, because that's what you were to us. That's what you've always been." Kevin stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the ocean, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "But I had a right to know," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "I had a right to know who I really am, where I came from. You stole that from me. You stole 25 years of my life, 25 years of wondering why I never felt like I quite fit, why I always felt like there was something missing." His words hit me like physical blows because I remembered those moments he was talking about. The times when Kevin would get this distant look in his eyes, like he was searching for something he couldn't name. I had always attributed it to his artistic nature, his tendency toward introspection, but now I wondered if it had been something deeper, some primal recognition that he didn't belong where he was. "You did fit," I said, standing up and moving toward him, my heart breaking for the pain I could see radiating from every inch of his body. "Kevin, you fit perfectly. You were my best friend, my partner in crime, my other half. That wasn't fake just because we don't share DNA. That was real. That was the most real thing in my life." I reached out to touch his arm, and when he didn't pull away, I felt a surge of hope that maybe we could get through this. Maybe our relationship could survive this earth-shattering revelation. "I know this changes everything, but it doesn't change how much I love you. It doesn't change the fact that you're my brother in every way that matters." But Kevin shook his head, his green eyes bright with unshed tears. "How can you say that, Mel? How can you act like this doesn't change everything? I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know where I belong. For 25 years, I thought I was part of this family, thought I had a place here, thought I understood my own story. But it was all a lie." He turned to face our parents, and the anguish in his expression was almost too much to bear. "Do you have any idea what it's like to find out that your entire identity is built on a foundation of deception? Do you understand that I don't even know my real name, my real birthday, my real heritage? I could have siblings out there, grandparents, a whole family that I've never met because you decided to play God with my life." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud, poisoning everything it touched. Dad stepped forward, his own eyes bright with tears I'd never seen him shed before. "Kevin, son, we know we made mistakes. We know we should have handled things differently. But please don't think for 1 second that our love for you was ever fake or that you don't belong here. You are our son in every way that matters. You are Melissa's brother. This family, this life we've built together. It's real, even if the circumstances that brought us together were complicated." His voice was pleading, desperate, and I could see the terror in his eyes at the thought of losing Kevin, of our family falling apart because of choices they'd made decades ago. Mom stood up slowly, her legs shaky beneath her, and moved toward Kevin with the careful steps of someone approaching a wounded animal. "I know you're angry," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I know you feel betrayed, and you have every right to those feelings. But Kevin, honey, you have to understand, we didn't keep this secret to hurt you. We kept it because we were terrified of losing you, because somewhere along the way, you stopped being the baby we were supposed to give back and became our son, our family, our heart." She paused just a few feet away from him, close enough to touch, but respecting his need for space. I know this is overwhelming, and I know you need time to process everything. But please don't let our mistakes destroy what we've built together. Please don't let this secret steal away 25 years of real love and real family." Kevin stared at the ocean for a long moment before speaking, his voice heavy with pain but resolute. "I need time to figure out who I am now, what this means for our family. I need to decide if I want to find my biological parents," he said, then turned to me with a flicker of the old Kevin in his eyes. "But Mel, what we have is real. Blood or no blood, you're still my sister, still the person who knows me better than anyone." The relief that flooded through me was overwhelming as I threw my arms around him, whispering that I loved him and we'd figure this out together, knowing that some bonds are stronger than blood and some families are chosen, not born.